The Ottawa real estate market closed out the first quarter of 2024 on a high note, and the Liberal government proposes a new Renters' Bill of Rights. But how will it impact tenants and landlords? I'm going to show you some stats, tell you some stories, give you some opinions, and I'm also going to use a bad word. All that and more in your April 2024 Ottawa real estate market update. Let's get to it. All right, so a quick note before we jump in. We've been doing this little bit since the start of the year where we kick off each market update with a new theme song. The songs are always terrible. That's kind of the joke. But it takes me a surprisingly long time to come up with them. I use these AI sites, they're kind of clunky. So anyways, we decided to just scrap the bit. So for this month's market update, we are just going to jump right in. So let's get cracking. Let's put those March 2024 freehold sales stats up on the screen now. All right, you can always pause the video if you want to take a longer look at the stats. And I will remind you that freehold homes are homes with no condo fees, okay? So it's not just detached homes, contrary to popular belief. You have row units, semi-detached, any house without a condo fee is a freehold. Now that that's out of the way, let's dig into the numbers a little, shall we? Freehold sales volume in March was okay. We sold 994 homes in total. That totals about a 30% increase from February, the month that comes before March, but that's expected, right? Obviously, March is when spring starts to sprang and the real estate market starts to really come to life. So a jump up in sales from Feb to March, it's not news. Now, 994 sales is also about a 10% increase from March of last year. So that is kind of interesting, but keep in mind that 2023 was a very low volume year, pretty much start to finish. And it was a year where sentiment around real estate here, just about everywhere, was extremely negative. Now, I wouldn't say that sentiment now is super positive. I mean, just look at the comments section for literally any online post about real estate. But internet comment sections aside, sentiment is nonetheless a fair bit more optimistic now than it was throughout most of last year. And that is one of the reasons that I think we're seeing improved sales volume so far. And so from a historical perspective, 994 sales, it's a fair bit lower than what we saw during the COVID years, right? That was the peak. It's also a notch below what we saw in the couple years just before COVID, where March sales totals were usually like in the 1,100 to 1,200 range. So there's a chance that this could just be random variance and that we'll see sales totals shoot way back up in the coming months. But it could also be that low inventory and general affordability challenges, there we go, are impacting overall sales volume. And it's probably a bit of both. So moving on, let's talk about inventory. And I will remind you that inventory, it's a metric that factors in both supply and demand all in one. And in the month of March, we saw inventory drop. Okay, we started March with 2.9 months of inventory for freehold. We ended it with 2.5 months of inventory. What that means, in simple terms, is that demand outpaced supply for March. It's the fourth straight month where that's been the case, and so inventory has been declining for a while now. Now, I say this every month, but I'm going to repeat myself here. What I'm about to say is an oversimplification, but conventional real estate wisdom, oxymoron, will tell you that 2.5 months of inventory puts us firmly in seller's market territory, meaning that in a big picture sense, right now, sellers have more power than buyers. Now, given our overall lack of supply and the sort of uptick in positive sentiment I mentioned earlier, would not surprise me to see inventory levels stay low, maybe even continue to decline in months to come. And keep in mind that the lower inventory gets, the more challenging the market gets for buyers. Okay? In a low inventory market, the really good properties, and sometimes even just the sort of good ones, go very fast, and multiple offer scenarios, aka bidding wars, become more common. And those are the types of market dynamics that tend to push prices up, and that is what we saw in March. Look at that beautiful segue. In March, the average sale price for a freehold home in Ottawa was about $744K. That's about a 5% jump from February, and it's also almost 5% better than March of last year. Now, if you'll allow it, I'd like to tell you a little story about seasons and housing prices. And the reason I'm telling you this tale as old as time is because I just had this conversation with a client this week, and it's a chat I've had dozens and dozens, maybe even hundreds of times with clients over the years, and it usually comes up right around this time of year, right? So I think it could be insightful for some. All right, so here goes. So this particular client is looking to buy their first home. and they're finding that a lot of the homes we're going to see are selling very quickly, right? This is a busy individual. He doesn't live right in Ottawa at the moment. And so as a result, we always have to coordinate our showings at least a few days in advance. And what we're seeing is that quite often we'll book a showing on a new listing, and before we can even get through the door, we'll get a notification telling us that there's already an offer on the property, sometimes even multiple offers. And so I'm explaining to the buyer that the spring market does tend to move at a faster pace, and that our hottest months in any given year are usually going to be April, May, and June. And so the question the client asks me is, well, Serge, does that mean that if I wait until summer or fall to buy, I'll get a better price? Right? And I've been asked some version of that question quite a bit over the years from both buyers and sellers, right? Again, usually around this time of year. And the honest answer to the question is, I don't know, right? Maybe, maybe not. Because I don't know for sure what's going to happen between now and summer or fall. No one does. What I do know for certain, however, is that the value of a home doesn't change with the seasons. It's not like once the calendar flips from June to July, the value of your home suddenly drops by 5% or whatever. When we talk about the spring market, when we as agents talk about the spring market usually being a hot market, what we really mean is just that the months of April, May, and June are typically the months where we see the largest number of transactions. And those are also the months where the pace of the market is normally at its most hectic. The buyers come out in the spring and the sellers come out in the spring, and everything just kind of goes into overdrive except for my sleep, all right? And the reason for all of that is actually pretty simple. And that's that the spring just happens to be a really convenient time to buy or sell a home for a lot of people, right? The weather is nicer, so dealing with showings as a buyer or a seller is a lot easier. Buying or selling in the spring typically means you're moving sometime in the summer, which is a time where people are generally less busy with work. Their kids aren't in school, right? You also get to settle into your new home before back to school or before your work gets busy again, etc. Right? So a good analogy for this is to just think of the real estate market like a 24-hour grocery store, right? Most people do their grocery shopping on Saturday morning, right? And if you're one of those people who goes to the grocery store Saturday morning, you know it's probably going to be a bit of a zoo, right? But you also recognize it's a really convenient time to do your groceries, and you know that the shelves at that time are going to be fully stocked. That's what shopping for a home in the spring market is like. Now, if you're one of these people who just doesn't want to deal with all the madness that comes with shopping for groceries on a Saturday morning, you might decide, hey, you know what? I'm gonna do my grocery shopping on Saturday night at midnight instead, right? I'm going during off-peak hours. And that's kind of like shopping for a home in the summer or the fall or the winter instead of the spring. But here's the thing. If you go to the grocery store on a Saturday night at midnight, yes, the experience will be far less hectic, but the price of your groceries won't change. Also, by the time you finally get to the store, chances are that all of the best meat and produce will already be gone, and in some cases, they may be completely sold out of what you went there looking for. So you might go in looking to buy a head of lettuce and have to settle for a head of cabbage. So house shopping in the spring, much like doing your groceries on a Saturday morning, gives you access to the best supply and the best chance of finding exactly what you're looking for, but it is generally a more stressful process. Also, ultimately, there's not a person on the planet Earth who can tell you with any sort of certainty what the price of lettuce, much less housing, is going to be months from now, all right? Pretty good little analogy, right? I think so. All right, so I've said it a million times. I know it's tempting to try and time the market, but it is a fool's errand. Contrary to popular belief, the price chart for homes in Ottawa doesn't look the same every year, and that's because property values are based on a bunch of macroeconomic factors. Big word, right? So things like interest rates, inflation, inventory, new housing starts, rental availability, population growth, and a whole lot more. But the one thing I can tell you for sure does not impact the property's value is which month the calendar says it is, all right? Hope that clears it up. And I also hope I continue to be lucky enough to continue having these types of conversations with hundreds of other great buyer and seller clients in the years to come. Closing out the freehold stats here, we saw a big Big old drop in the average number of days it took for homes to sell in March. We went from 37 days to sell to 29 days to sell. 29 days is a very healthy number. It means good inventory is selling fast, but it's not quite crazy bidding wars everywhere you look level. Okay, if we see days to sell get below 14 or 15 days, then watch out. Lastly, homes that sold in March on average went for 98.8% of their list price, really right around what you'd expect given everything else we just talked about. So that does it for the Freehold stats. Now let's talk about Freehold's little brother, condo. But before we do that, a quick word from our sponsor. This month's market update is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel. Our commercials are so freaking annoying, they may actually cure your gambling addiction. All right, now that that's out of the way, let's get those condo stats up on the screen now. All right, so the condo market is really moving in lockstep with the freehold market in recent months. In March, we sold a total of 321 condos in Ottawa. It's about 6% more than we sold in March of last year. It is a lower total by a fair bit than what we were seeing during the peak. That was 2021, 2022. It's also a bit lower than the totals we were seeing in the 2 or 3 years right before the peak. Now, one of the factors that I think is impacting and will continue to impact condo sales volume in particular is that over the course of the last 5 to 7 years, we've seen a lot of builders shift from building new condos to building luxury apartment rentals instead. All right, so a lot of the new supply that is coming to market when it comes to vertical housing is for rent, not for sale, which obviously impacts sales volume, right? When I started in real estate in 2015, just a young pup, not that young, but anyways, there were very few purpose-built luxury apartment rentals or, condo quality apartments, if you will, in Ottawa. It just wasn't much of a thing here yet. And a big part of the reason for that was that back then, the gap between what it cost you on a per month basis to own a condo compared to renting one was quite small, sometimes non-existent. So very few people who could afford to buy back then were deciding to rent. In most cases, buying was the better long-term option, and it basically cost the same. Now, fast forward to today, and with interest rates and the stress test and the fact that condo fees have gotten more expensive due to inflation, now all of a sudden the cost gap between owning a condo and renting that very same unit has grown considerably. Right? So now we have a lot more people, even some who could still buy if they really wanted to, who are deciding to rent. Hence the recent proliferation, another big word, of purpose-built luxury rentals. All right, so that concludes story time with Serge. Moving on, condo inventory also dropped in March. We went from 2.5 months to 2.2 months. That again is seller market territory, oversimplification, disclaimer, blah, blah, blah. The average sale price of a condo in March was about $437,000. That's up about 1.5% from last month, February, and it's about 5% better than March of last year, 2023. However, the average sale price for condos has fallen somewhere between about $410,000 and $450,000 in every single month for the last year and a half, right? So this monthly average for March is really nothing new or newsworthy. Moving on, just like for freehold, the average number of days it took to sell a condo dropped significantly in March. We went from 44, which felt high given inventory levels, to about 30, which aligns a lot more with everything else we're seeing. Lastly, the sale price to list price ratio for condos sold in March was 98.4%. Again, nothing really new or newsworthy there. All right, so that does it for the stats. Now let's talk about this new Renters Bill of Rights, shall we? All right, now for those of you who are not aware of what I'm referring to, about a week ago, the federal government indicated that they would be proposing something they are calling the Renters Bill of Rights. The general idea behind the bill is that it is meant to be a way to, and I'm quoting, protect renters from low vacancy rates, high prices, and other significant challenges, end quote. Now, the full proposed bill will be revealed in the next federal budget announcement, which is set for April 16th, so pretty soon. But based on the information available so far, we know that it will include the following 4 items. So first, the Liberals are proposing that we create a national standard lease agreement. Okay? We already have a mandated standard lease agreement in Ontario, but what is being proposed here is that we take it one step further and create a standard lease that applies to all of Canada. So no matter where you rent in the country, you'd be dealing with the exact same lease template. Next up, the Renters' Bill of Rights would require a landlord to disclose a rental property's pricing history. Right? The claim here is that this would give tenants information that they could use to negotiate better rents. Third, the government would create a $15 million fund to provide legal assistance to tenants who are fighting renovictions. Okay? If you're not familiar with the term renoviction, that's where a landlord will serve a tenant with an eviction notice because the unit has to be renovated. It's not illegal, it's not illegal for a landlord to do that, by the way, but in some cases the practice is abused by landlords who use it as a means of removing tenants who are paying below market rent. Lastly, the Renters' Bill of Rights would change federal rules so that making rent payments on time would count towards someone's credit score. Okay, so now that we've gone over the basics, here are my thoughts. So I will say first and foremost that I am a little skeptical of whether this Renters' Bill of Rights ever actually comes to fruition. This particular government has made these sorts of promises in the past, and for the most part, it's given them some positive press, but it's led to very little actual change, right? Some of you may recall that one of the Liberals' main promises during the 2021 election was that if elected, they would institute a home buyer's bill of rights. And then they were elected, and the home buyer's bill of rights just kind of fell by the wayside. Like, nothing ever came of it. More recently, last fall to be exact, there was the announcement of a new Canadian mortgage charter, which was meant to help keep Canadians in their homes in spite of rising mortgage costs. Once again, it was triumphantly announced, it was talked about for a week or two, and then again, it just kind of faded away without any actual change, okay? But hey, maybe the 3rd or 30th time will be the charm here. All right, so let's give the benefit of the doubt and pretend that the measures in this Renters' Bill of Rights all get implemented. And if that happens, what will it actually mean? Let's dig in a little. So we'll start with the standardized federal lease. I think that in general, having a standard lease is a good idea so long as there is some flexibility built into that lease for both sides, landlords and tenants. As mentioned, we did introduce a standard lease in Ontario a few years ago, and I think that overall it's really been a positive. Having said that, the biggest challenge I see with creating a national standard is that each individual province and territory is in charge of their own rental regulations. I can't imagine those same provinces and territories just agreeing to hand control over to the feds. And so I think it would be very difficult to create a standard that works effectively with the 13 different sets of rules and regulations which govern tenancies across Canada. Quite frankly, I have to say, I think a national standard lease would just end up being super convoluted, and it would probably just frustrate a lot of tenants and landlords. So I gotta be honest, I'm not a big fan of that one. Next, landlords would be required to disclose a property's rental price history. So your potential landlord would have to tell you what they were charging past tenants of that property, basically, right? I don't think this is a bad thing per se. At the end of the day, it's good information for a tenant to have. And in my opinion, there's really no good reason for an honest landlord to hide that information from potential tenants. Having said that, this notion that having this information is somehow going to help tenants negotiate better rents, to me, shows a total lack of understanding of just some very basic economic principles, which is, it's a little concerning when it's coming from our elected leaders. Right? If it was like a 12-year-old who was proposing this rule as part of like some school project, I'd be all like, hey, like, good job, Jimmy. Like, you mean well, good job. A+, right? But when it's the prime minister of your country, who is an adult, by the way, it's like, really? Like, do you not understand supply and demand, that the market sets the price, like that whole thing, like, again, economics 101. A unit will ultimately always rent for whatever someone is willing to pay for it. So when you have record low vacancy rates, in the Liberals' own words, and when landlords are getting multiple applications every time a unit becomes available, rent prices will rise. right? It's inevitable. You could literally be the best negotiator in the world. It won't matter a lick if there is a lineup of other people who are happy to pay much more than you for the same unit. So again, I think disclosing a property's rental history is a good thing, but it will do absolutely zero to help rental affordability in the current environment. So to me, a bit of a swing and a miss on that one. Next, you have a $15 million fund to help tenants with legal assistance for the purpose of fighting renovictions. Okay, now, straight up, no snark, I think this is great. I am certainly not against all renovictions, like some. I think that in situations where properties are in disrepair, especially when that disrepair is a result of the tenant's actions, a renoviction can be appropriate. Having said that, I also recognize that a lot of renoviction notices are served in bad faith. There are way too many situations where a landlord might renovict a tenant and then literally not even renovate the unit. You know, maybe they like throw a coat of paint or something like that. But at the end of the day, it's really just a way for them to get more rent for the same unit from a different tenant, right? And that's not cool. So I think that giving tenants access to legal services in order to fight renovictions that they believe are being served to them in bad faith is great. I can see that sort of thing having a real impact in discouraging landlords from even trying to serve a renoviction notice in bad faith in the first place. And I think that ultimately benefits both good tenants and good landlords. So hats off on that one. Last but not least, the Renters' Bill of Rights proposes we would change the rules so that making rent payments on time will now have a positive impact on a person's credit score. Okay, the logic here is that making your mortgage payment on time every month helps you build good credit. So why wouldn't we do the same for renters? Once again, credit where credit is due, pun intended. I actually love this idea. Right? The only thing that isn't clear here is whether or not missed payments and or late payments would also be recorded and negatively impact credit scores. I do personally think it should work both ways, and I'm certain most landlords would agree. Ironically though, regardless of how they implement this, if it is implemented, I think this new rule is the one that would actually help some tenants negotiate better terms with landlords. I can tell you that all of the landlords I work with, right, the smart ones, because if they're smart, they work with me. And if they work with me, I make sure they're smart. They would all happily choose to rent to a great tenant over squeezing every single penny of rent out of their units. Okay? In fact, I tell you that a lot of my landlord clients will purposely list their units at slightly below market rents in order to attract those like A+ tenants, right? They are willing to take a little less rent if it means getting a tenant with a great credit score, great references, someone who's easy to get along with, responsible, the whole thing. And here's the thing. When someone has kind of a middling credit score, it certainly could be for the typical bad reasons, you know, like they're carrying too much debt, they're frequently late on payments, they miss them altogether, they've been sent to collections in the past, et cetera, et cetera. However, sometimes a person has a middling credit score because they simply have what's called a thin credit file, okay? And that just means they don't have a long history of building credit. So for example, a younger person who's only been working for a few years, doesn't have a mortgage, they take public transit so they don't have a car payment, they didn't have any student loans, they prefer to make their purchases with debit cards and cash instead of credit, and so on. That type of person who is being fiscally responsible can often end up with kind of a crappy credit score as a result, right? Which then works against them when they apply to be a tenant somewhere. So helping people like that build up their credit so that they can set themselves apart in a positive way is amazing. Again, I'm always going to be in favor of any measure that will help good tenants and good landlords. And I really can't see any downside for either group on this one. All right, so all in all, there are definitely some very good ideas in the Renters' Bill of Rights. There are also some not so good ones, in my opinion. Ultimately though, this is where we kind of go back to regularly scheduled programming. There is no bill or legislation or charter that is going to fix rental affordability in and of itself. All right, so for a long time, the feds have been trying to fix housing affordability through regulation, and now it feels like they've just sort of given up on that and they're turning their focus to renting, right? But the same principles apply in both cases. Rules and regulations address the symptoms of housing unaffordability. They do not address the cause. And that cause is that there are too many people who need homes and not enough homes for them. right? So if you've watched these videos before, you probably know where I'm going with this. We're gonna end on a bang here, so here goes, okay? Now's the time to get the kids out of the room, because if you wanna fix the housing crisis for both rentals and homes for sale, what you really need to do is, say it with me now, build more fucking homes. All of these bills, these charters, these regulations, they could be a part of a larger move in the right direction, but until you address supply, you're just sidestepping the real issue. As always, if you'd like to discuss your real estate goals, maybe get some guidance, I'm always happy to chat. You can use the Calendly link in this video's description to access my calendar and book a discovery call with me at a time that works for you. And this is a busy time of year, so if you don't see an opening in my calendar, just send me a direct message and I'll see if I can move some stuff around for you. All right, that'll do it for this month. As always, thank you for watching. I'm Serge Papineau, and I'll see you next time.